Hi, I'm Dave Van Oss, Agricultural Markets Manager for Libro Credit Union. Libro is very excited to be this year's presenting sponsor for the virtual Outdoor Farm Show. We truly hope that your farm business finds great value with this upcoming session.
Hi, I'm Bruce Burnett, Director of Weather and Markets for Glacier FarmMedia, and we'll be talking today about the global weather situation as well as the wheat outlook across the globe. Certainly, it's been a challenging year in the wheat marketing, so certainly we do need to pay attention to some of the issues as we go through this marketing year. Again, when we go to into planting season here in Southern Ontario over the next month or so. It's certainly something we need to pay attention to in terms of what the potential is for the wheat market in the upcoming year. Now, wheat markets this year have been rather blah. I think everybody is aware of that. And the reason is because global production and ending stocks have increased quite dramatically this year and to record levels as well, which is leaving the bears sort of in control of the futures and markets. Production has been variable this year, though. There have been some droughts. There have been some smaller crops, but basically Russia, Canada, Australia are looking to produce some very good crops this year, and that's sort of overwhelmed any of the areas where we've lost production. Dryness in Europe and Ukraine certainly have bitten into production a bit, but it wasn't enough to keep us from hitting another global record in terms of crop production this year. I think the positive side in the wheat market this year is demand has remained very, very strong. Prices are likely to follow the moves in corn and soybeans rather than be a leader this year, unless we run into some substantial problems in the 21-22 crop year. And looking at the 21-22 crop year, the crop that's just going to be planted here in the Northern Hemisphere, we're likely going to see a smaller wheat area, especially in North America because of these prices. The stronger prices for oil seeds, certainly I think are going to bite into the wheat area, both in Canada and the U.S. So it's something to keep an eye on. Again, will it be enough to move prices out of the rut we've sort of been in? I don't know if we'll see a large enough reduction in area to do that, but certainly if we see some production challenges, that could also tighten wheat supplies as well in the upcoming crop year. But for this crop year, it just looks like we're going to see enough supplies and prices are going to remain a follower rather than a leader. So we just had a USDA report last week, and nobody's surprise, we saw them increase wheat production again this month, up to a record 770 million tons. Certainly a very, very large a record production compared with previous years. If you look back to I would call it the era of high prices in the early parts of this decade, you can see production levels are quite a bit smaller than they currently are. And that's one of the problems the wheat market's been fighting with. We've just seen too much in the way of production around the globe. The USDA report also increased the ending stocks, which is not welcome news for world wheat. Again, ending stocks at the end of this crop year, so June of 2021. But again, 319 million tons is another record on the ending stocks front. One of the interesting things to note, though, and this graph breaks it down, is the bottom part of the chart shows the rest of the world in terms of their ending stocks versus China. And over the past 10 years, we've seen China really start to stockpile wheat. Again, I think this is government policy, and they're doing it mostly to ensure supplies for their population. There's no other reason, I think, that you would carry this much wheat out there. The one thing that you can be assured of, though, is that China's not going to be selling these stocks back into the international market. These are for domestic use. So in some respects, they're dead stocks. If you look at the rest of the world, that bottom part of the chart, the stock situation is a lot more friendly. Certainly, there's, this year and last year, China held more stocks than the rest of the world. And if you look at the rest of the world's trajectory over the past 5 years, really the stock levels have remained pretty consistent. So although we see headlines of increasing stocks, really in terms of usable stocks, those stocks have remained pretty consistent over the last 5 years. One of the drivers of the production number has been Russia. USDA held firm at their 78 million ton production estimate this year. Some internal Russian forecasters have slightly higher levels, but again, it doesn't really matter too much. I think you can see at 78 million tons, this would be the second largest production in Russia. One of the interesting things, though, about the wheat production in Russia this year was that it wasn't consistent over the entire wheat belt, especially the winter wheat belt in Russia. So the best crops have been sort of in the upper Volga and central growing areas, which are a considerable distance from the Black Sea ports. So the Russian exporters are going to have higher export costs this year relative to previous years when they've had fairly large crops in the regions adjacent to the Black Sea ports. So it's just something to keep an eye on. We're starting to see that happen in terms of Russian prices. Even with that big, large Russian crop, if you take a look at the Egyptian tenders, which Russia regularly participates in, and you see over the past 3 years, the last tender in Egypt did not award any tonnage on that tender, at least yet, because they thought prices were a bit high. But the Russian offers were a little bit over $225 US per ton on this latest tender. So certainly prices have gone up a little bit in Russia as we move through this marketing year. And it's fairly encouraging because despite the fact that we've seen wheat prices not move up consistently here, it does show that cash prices globally are starting to increase, which makes sense. Again, we're starting to see the tail end of the global harvest, which essentially will end up here at the end of the year in South America and Australia and South Africa. So certainly there is some hope here on the world wheat situation for some increasing support for prices. The only thing I'd caution is that those big production estimates will keep a lid on how high these prices can go. Argentina's production declined this past month. USDA dropped it 1 million tons down to 19.5 million tons. But again, if you take a look, you will see that the production levels over the past couple of years have been pretty much in this 19 to 20 million ton range. And that's certainly a lot better than Argentina was doing, let's say, back 5 to 10 years ago. So certainly Argentina is participating more in the global wheat market again, especially in terms of exports. The thing that's driven this has been the reduction in their export tariffs that happened in the previous government's administration here. We haven't seen those tariffs be readjusted so that they would impact the Argentinian area. Last week, we did get some rains in Argentina, or I should say the first week in September, we did see some rains. I circled the area here. The best rains were actually in Uruguay, which is the country to the right on the chart there. But it also hit some of the main growing areas in northern Buenos Aires, southern Santa Fe, and southern Entre Rios provinces. And the timing of these rains is very good. Those northern growing areas that they have in Argentina are basically getting into the heading stage right now. So they had a dry winter and dry conditions when they were planting the crops. So these rains really should perk things up. However, I would caution, again, about a third of Argentina's wheat is in that area that received the rains. lesser, about 2/3 of the country didn't receive as much in terms of beneficial rainfall. Australia, again, we've benefited in Canada, and other exporting countries have of smaller Australian production over the past 3 years. But this year, the rains have come back. We're in La Niña, as I'm going to outline later on in the forecast section. But certainly this has been beneficial for Australian rains. And USDA bumped up their crop production number to 28.5 million tons. That's up, I think, 2 million tons from the previous month. ABARE, Australian forecasting agency, had bumped up their forecast of Australian production to 28.9 million tons. So this wasn't unanticipated, at least anyway. The record production was close to 32 million tons back in 2016-17. And I think they probably do have a chance of getting close to that record in Australia this year. But they will need some more follow-up rains in southern growing areas of the country over the next month or so in order for that to happen. If you take a look at the August rainfall in Australia, Western Australia, or on the left-hand side of the map, you can see they had some excellent rains, 1.5 to almost 2 times normal precipitation in the main growing areas. There was a band of close to normal precipitation, but again, even normal precipitation is welcome in Australia after 3 years of drought. So something certainly that's positive. On the eastern side of the country, the largest producing state, New South Wales, received some excellent rainfall during the month of August. Up into Queensland, which is up in the northeastern part of that circle, we did see some drier areas, and those areas are the regions that probably need the rain most urgently. In central Queensland, we'd be looking at crops now in the filling stage. In the southern parts of the state, we're still basically in the early parts of heading. So rains up in Queensland are needed. Otherwise, things are looking pretty good. And this is the reason that are driving factors. They're driving the production estimates from Australia over the past few months here. Again, in terms of threats to the crop, a hot, dry finish certainly may cut the yield prospects a little bit if that was to happen. But with the La Niña underway, I think the probabilities of that happening have diminished significantly, especially when you compare it with the last 2 to 3 years when we had drought. Turning to the U.S., the U.S. numbers did not change in this crop report. Again, USDA leaves their domestic wheat market changes or situation unchanged until the small grains report at the end of the month, and then the final October WASDE report. So if you take a look at soft red winter ending stocks, we're still tight on soft red winter. USDA is forecasting very tight stocks, around just a little bit over 100 million bushels. Again, slightly under 3 million tons. So certainly the soft red situation itself isn't all that bearish, which is helping to support the Chicago market. Chicago wheat futures have been trading at a premium to Kansas City for most of the year. As well, it's even started to trade above spring wheat values over the past 4 months fairly consistently. So this is a reflection, I think, of the tight stock situation on the soft red winter front. Again, it's a bit of a dichotomy to see this global crop that's really large. Some of the largest soft wheat competitors like Russia in the export markets with very, very low prices, but U.S. situation is tight enough to support the Chicago contract here. Just taking a look at that Chicago contract, you can see we've developed an interesting formation here since hitting the lows in late June, which is, again, fairly typical for the wheat contract in Chicago. We moved into fairly abrupt up channel into about the 10th of July, where we flattened off and traded sideways into the 1st of August took a bit of a dip, and then we're in the second phase here. We rallied soft red winter wheat futures up till about a couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, and then we've been trading in a range here ever since. I think there's a good possibility we'll take another leg higher here sometime in late September, early October. That's what usually happens seasonally. So again, we could see trading up in the sort of the 575 to 585 range here, maybe by the end of the month. One thing to look at as you're planning your winter wheat crop this year, whether you want to do some price protection for next year. The carry in the market to the September is running roughly around 20 cents right now. So it's not a spectacular carry, but certainly if we see a rally, it would be, I think, something to consider to put in some protection in terms of prices for the 2021 crop. Just if we get up into that, $6, close to that $6 level on the futures out in the deferred contracts. So something to just keep an eye on over the next few weeks and months. I don't think that in the upcoming crop year that this lower area is going to impact our global production all that much. So should that be the case, then it probably is a good thing to put a floor in terms of your prices for next year's crop. Take a look at the moisture situation in the U.S. The soft red growing areas in the U.S. Are sort of a tale of two regions. A couple of the hurricanes that moved through the Gulf this year have given some fairly good rainfall up into the southern U.S. growing areas of hard red winter, especially Hurricane Laura. Its track moved through this region and dumped a fair amount of precipitation. So they're not lacking for soil moisture levels from the boot heel of Missouri down into Arkansas, parts of Mississippi as well. So it's really a fairly good situation for those southern areas. Up the Ohio Valley as well, we see some pretty good moisture levels, certainly enough to get the crops established well. There is some dryness in the more northern growing areas, I guess, of soft red winter, from essentially northern Missouri over into parts of east central Ohio. We do have some dry spots developing that haven't picked up the moisture. This is still pretty early in the planting game, at least anyway, for winter wheat crops. So I'm not too concerned about it. Only if we stay dry for the next couple of months would I become a little bit more concerned about the establishment of the soft red crop. Out in the western areas, the hard red growing regions, which is that circle over starting in Texas going up into western Nebraska and southern South Dakota, you can see there that situation is a bit drier. There have been some rains in Kansas, central Kansas especially, but most of that belt remains fairly dry. They will need some rains here by the end of October in order to get the winter wheat crops planted. The unfortunate thing is with the current wide discount in the futures between hard red winter and the Kansas City and Chicago contracts, that's made hard red winter wheat not a very good option for a lot of farmers in this region. So again, with increasing prices or better price outlook for corn and soybeans, certainly I think we'll see some of this area go down again this year. So we've been hitting essentially over 120-year lows in terms of the wheat area, or 115 to 120-year lows in the wheat area in the U.S. And I think that trend probably continues next year. If you take a look at the situation in southern Russia this fall, again, there's some very, very dry areas. I've circled, the bottom circle is the chief area that produces winter wheat close to the Black Sea ports. Includes most of South Russia and into the Caucasus region. Those areas are still very, very dry. They stay dry through most of the growing season. and this is a big concern for them. They have maybe a little bit bigger planting window than they do up in the northern areas, which is that northern circle. But again, they would like to see some decent moisture move through this area, I would say by the beginning of October. Up in those northern areas, they're planting winter wheat already. This is the Upper Volga and Central Volga Valley region, as well as the Central Russian region. Those areas had a big crop this year, and they've got lots of residual moisture around, so the soil moisture situation looks pretty good there. If we turn to Ukraine, Ukraine's had some problems here. Certainly this fall, they've had some, or the late summer, they've had some dryness here. It's impacting their soybean and corn production, but as well, it may has some give them some problems in terms of establishing the winter wheat crop this year. So most of the eastern 2/3 of Ukraine, which is most of their production area, is very, very dry, not a lot of soil moisture levels. They certainly would benefit from a good rain here before the middle of October, which is about the time when they have to have that crop in the ground. So, and they would prefer to get it in earlier. So even by the 1st of October, it would be pretty necessary for them to get some increased moisture here, or the cropped area may decline. The other area that remains fairly dry is Northern Europe. Essentially, Northern France and Central France are the driest, but there's still dryness in the Ukraine, through the Low Countries into Germany and even parts of Poland. So really these regions do need some moisture here soon. It is already impacting their planting of winter canola and winter barley, but also winter wheat will be a concern here if they don't get some rain soon. Again, in these northern areas, they have a fairly wide planting window. It's a little bit different than when you go into the Black Sea region, but still a very good, very poor start to the season for Europe. Now, turning to Southern Ontario, this is just the rainfall that was received over the first 10 days of September, essentially, plus last couple of days of August. And you can see some pretty good rains across most of Southern Ontario, essentially 50 to 75 millimeters. The only area that didn't receive a lot of moisture was in the Niagara Peninsula, where essentially 15 to 25 millimeters. So there looks to be adequate moisture for planting this fall. And again, with the corn and soybean harvest just around the corner here, it'd be nice to keep dry for a while. So I think we have enough moisture here to help with keeping things dry at harvest and still having enough moisture to get the winter wheat crops up nicely. So turning more to the international weather impacts here, this is the current forecast or current temperature anomaly in the Central Pacific for in the El Nino region. These are the sea surface temperature deviations. Just to refresh your memory, a negative number below -1 puts you into a La Nina. Positive number above +1 puts you into an El Nino. So certainly we have a La Nina developing here. All of the models now have a pretty strong probability that we'll be in a La Nina starting, let's say in September here in through October, certainly. So that's going to have some impact on the weather here in Canada. So I thought I'd focus a little bit on it. Here's the probabilities of all the models that predict El Nino, La Nina. And you can see here that we've gone from probabilities in July, August, September below 50%. This is the blue line of a La Nina. Now you're up above the 55 to 60% range by the time we get into September, October, November. Certainly, it looks like we're headed that way, and the temperatures indicate that we are as well. How does that impact? I thought I'd give you two impact our weather over the next 3 months or so. I thought I'd show this to you just to give you an idea. Again, this is the U.S. models using the La Niña inputs. And you can see for precipitation through most of the Midwest into Southern Ontario, really all you should expect is normal in terms of the climate. The only areas in Canada that are adjacent to above normal are over in the U.S. Pacific Northwest, and so up into British Columbia and Southern Alberta, maybe parts of southwestern Saskatchewan. Temperatures are going to be above normal here over the period. Certainly, one doesn't necessarily associate La Niña with warmer than normal temperatures, let's say in the winter season, but in the falls, there is a tendency for above normal temperatures. So if you look at Southern Ontario, they would certainly be in this area where we're expecting above normal temperatures this fall. So that, I think, is good news for harvest. We've got sort of a normal precipitation and above normal temperature forecast here through the end of November. If you take a look at Environment Canada, it's much the same. We'll do this a bit in the reverse order, but here are the temperatures, temperature anomalies, and they are looking for above normal temperatures as well. It's not a surprise because their methodology is pretty similar to the methodology used by the U.S. weather folks as well. So above normal temperatures. In terms of precipitation, again, Southern Ontario, fairly dry situation there. So that looks good, again, for harvest. So two forecasts using the same input of the La Niña, indicating that we'll see some pretty good conditions here for harvest. I know everybody's wondering about the winter forecast. I didn't have time to put up the winter forecast, but I think we've all seen the Farmer's Almanac, and just to give you an idea, the major forecasting national weather services are also indicating that we're probably going to expect a fairly wet and cold winter. I would say more chances of above normal precipitation than extended periods of cold, but usually the two go hand in hand. So I think by reading those headlines from the Almanac, you get a pretty good idea as to what's probably in store for us this winter. So in summary, wheat supplies are going to grow this year. Most of the crops in the Southern Hemisphere are in the middle of the production right now, but the rest in the Northern Hemisphere is pretty much all harvested, except for some spring wheat crops. Dryness is a concern. Europe, Ukraine, and Russia as we head into the planting season. We've got about a month left here for them to get some beneficial rains. Low prices, we're going to expect a reduction in the winter wheat area in North America. Hard red winter is probably the most vulnerable of the wheat classes that we have out there. And again, fall weather this winter looks pretty good for Southern Ontario and for the planting of the wheat crop as well. So a reasonably good forecast here for the coming months. With that, I'd like to thank you for attending Canada's Digital Farm Show, and certainly if you have any questions, that would be wonderful. Just type them in and I'll try to answer them as best as I can.